I was abandoned on my blind date. Until the Alpha King at the next table took notice. The soft hum of the city outside did little to calm Lila's nerves. She adjusted the strap of her dress, smoothing imaginary wrinkles from the fabric that had never been wrinkled, and took a deep breath. Her reflection in the restaurant window caught her eye, eyes wide with anticipation, lips slightly parted, hands trembling just a little. Tonight was supposed to be special. A blind date, arranged through mutual friends, a chance for something new, maybe even life-changing. She had carefully prepared for this evening, from the way her hair fell perfectly around her shoulders to the subtle perfume that hinted at sophistication without being overpowering. Everything was meticulously planned, every detail designed to impress someone she had never met. Her shoes clicked softly against the polished wooden floor as she walked into the restaurant, a quiet, elegant space with low lighting and small flickering candles that made the room feel intimate and personal. The smell of roasted herbs and grilled meats mingled with soft notes of vanilla and wine, enveloping her senses in a way that was comforting and familiar. She scanned the room for her table and spotted it immediately, near the corner, by the window. A small, round table adorned with a single candle and neatly folded napkins awaited her. She smiled, a little nervously, and approached. Pulling out the chair, she sat down gracefully, crossing her legs and placing her hands neatly in her lap. She could feel the occasional glance from other diners, some curious, some indifferent. It was a crowded night, and yet, in this moment, she felt exposed. Vulnerable. Like everyone could see her nerves, her hopes, her fears, all laid bare on this small stage of a restaurant table for one. Minutes passed. She checked her watch. 5 minutes late, she told herself. Perhaps he was stuck in traffic. 10 minutes. Maybe he had been delayed unexpectedly. 15. She could feel the warmth of the restaurant contrasted sharply with the cold trickle of disappointment creeping down her spine. She sipped her water, trying to act natural, but every glance toward the entrance heightened the ache in her chest. She imagined him walking through the door, apologizing with that charming smile, smooth hair, and eyes that held a spark of mischief. Her heart thudded at the thought, each beat echoing the fragile hope she had built around this meeting. 20 minutes. A nervous laugh escaped her lips as she muttered under her breath, "Well, at least the food looks good." She tried to focus on the menu, on the idea of enjoying a meal alone, but it was impossible. Her mind kept returning to the empty space across from her. The chair that should have been filled by someone she had been curious to meet, someone who might have been the start of something new, remained empty. By now, whispers began to brush against the edges of her consciousness. Conversations she couldn't entirely hear, laughter that seemed to linger just a little too long, the occasional glance from nearby diners. She felt their scrutiny like a cold draft against her back. Her stomach twisted. Why didn't he come? Did something happen to him? Was this a cruel joke? She swallowed hard, forcing herself to calm down, to keep composure, to act as though she had not been abandoned. Her phone buzzed on the table. A message from her friend, "He's supposed to be there. Are you okay?" She typed a quick response, "I'm fine, just waiting." Her fingers hesitated over the keyboard. Did she really mean that? The truth was, she didn't feel fine at all. She felt humiliated, left alone, exposed. She felt the sting of rejection before even knowing him. She tried to distract herself by scanning the room, taking in the other couples and diners. A man laughed too loudly at his own joke across the restaurant. A woman sneezed, and her date immediately offered a napkin, and Lila felt a pang of jealousy and longing for even the smallest gestures of attention. She looked down at her plate, imagining what it would have been like to share this moment with someone. Then, as if fate decided she should not be entirely ignored, she noticed him. Not her blind date, someone else. Across the room, seated at a table not far from hers, was a man who seemed to command the room without moving a muscle. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and carried himself with an air of quiet authority. His dark hair fell just slightly into his eyes, which were sharp, calculating, and piercing. He wore a tailored suit, perfectly fitted, and his presence seemed almost impossible to ignore. Their eyes met, though only briefly, and Lila felt a jolt she could not explain. It was as though he had seen her in a way no one else in the room had. He didn't look away, didn't glance down at his phone, didn't distract himself with his companions. His gaze held, steady, intense, almost claiming. She looked away quickly, cheeks burning, heart hammering in her chest. She wasn't used to this kind of attention, not from strangers, not in a restaurant full of people. And yet, a part of her wanted to look back, to see him again, to confirm that the feeling she had just sensed was real. Time seemed to slow. The waiter brought her a menu she hadn't ordered, and she barely glanced at it. She could still feel him watching her. The sense of being truly seen, even by someone she did not know, was intoxicating. A flush of warmth spread across her chest, competing with the cold sting of rejection she had felt just moments before. She wondered, not for the first time, if her life had taken an unexpected turn tonight. Her mind raced, spinning scenarios of who he could be, why he was looking at her, what it meant. She imagined conversations, introductions, laughter. A small, impossible hope began to stir within her. Could this mysterious stranger be something more? Someone who would notice her when no one else did? Her thoughts were interrupted by a sigh, small but audible. She glanced down at the empty chair again, the reminder of her failed blind date, the humiliation she had endured. But then, her gaze drifted back across the room, and he was still there, watching. Not aggressively, not rudely, but with a curiosity, a keen interest that seemed almost predatory in its precision. She felt a shiver run down her spine. Not fear exactly, but anticipation, a sharp edge of excitement she hadn't felt in years. Who was this man? Why was he watching her? And more importantly, what would he do next? The waiter returned, placing a glass of water in front of her with a polite nod. She smiled faintly, grateful for the distraction, yet her eyes kept drifting toward him. He raised his own glass, just slightly, in her direction, a silent acknowledgement that made her heart skip. She wanted to look away, to pretend she hadn't noticed, but something inside her refused. That glance had already changed the trajectory of her evening, perhaps even her life. Minutes passed. She debated leaving, finishing her drink quickly, and going home to nurse her bruised pride. But the pull toward him was undeniable, magnetic, impossible to ignore. She imagined what it would be like if he came to her table, if he spoke to her, if he acknowledged her presence in a world that had otherwise seemed indifferent. And then, almost imperceptibly, he moved. A small shift in posture, a slight lean forward, as though the space between them had suddenly compressed. Lila's breath caught in her throat. Her mind screamed caution, warning her of strangers, of social norms, of embarrassment. Yet, every instinct in her body told her to look, to see, to pay attention. She sat up straighter, hands folded neatly in her lap, pretending composure she did not feel. And in that moment, she realized something profound. Her blind date may have abandoned her, left her alone and humiliated. But the universe, fate, destiny, or whatever force was at play, had not. Someone had noticed her. Someone had seen her. And perhaps, just perhaps, this evening was far from over. Her heart raced, a mixture of anxiety and exhilaration. She wondered what he would do next, if he would approach, if he would speak. She imagined his voice, deep and commanding, resonating in a way that would make the room fall silent around them. She imagined his eyes, dark and compelling, locking onto hers with intent. And she imagined the possibility of being truly seen, not just looked at, not just noticed, but acknowledged for who she was. She didn't know him, had never met him, and yet already, she felt a pull she couldn't name. It was thrilling, terrifying, and intoxicating all at once. And in that crowded restaurant, surrounded by laughter, chatter, and the clinking of glasses, Lila realized that tonight's story was only just beginning. The man across the room leaned back in his chair, a quiet sense of control radiating from him that was impossible to ignore. His dark eyes didn't wander, didn't flit to a phone or conversation. They remained fixed on the woman sitting alone at the corner table. She was small in the grand expanse of the restaurant, yet to him, she seemed to occupy the entire space. Every movement she made, every subtle expression on her face, was magnified in his vision. Cale had seen many women, interacted with countless people, commanded rooms and attention without uttering a word, but something about her was different. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She was tense, yes, awkward, vulnerable, and yet there was an undercurrent of strength, a quiet resilience that set her apart. He noticed the way she tried to hide her hands, how she shifted in her seat, how her eyes darted toward the entrance and then back down at her empty table, as though willing herself to be invisible. He had to know her name. He had to know her story. There was something magnetic about her, something primal and instinctive that drew him in. Cale had always known when someone was meant for more, when there was a connection that went beyond mere chance. And in that moment, across a crowded restaurant, he knew. She was not someone to pass by, not someone to leave to the shadows. His mind, trained over decades of leading, observing, and asserting dominance, began calculating the approach. He didn't want to startle her, didn't want to overwhelm her. Yet he needed her to know he was there. It was a delicate balance, an alpha's awareness without intimidation, authority without oppression. His eyes softened fractionally as he studied her, noting the faint blush on her cheeks, the subtle tension in her shoulders, the way her lips pressed together as she attempted a small, polite smile at a passing waiter. Cale's internal dialogue was precise, measured, yet tinged with a rare emotion he seldom felt. She's remarkable. Not like the others. She's not seeking attention, yet she draws it effortlessly. Interesting. He observed how she glanced down at her phone, the small, hesitant movements that betrayed her nervousness. The sight ignited something in him, an instinctual desire to protect, to assert presence, to ensure she was seen properly, fully, as the person she was meant to be. Cale was not one to act impulsively, but the pull toward her was undeniable. He leaned slightly forward, placing his hands on the table, fingers steepled in thought. She is alone. She is exposed. And yet, there is strength here. She doesn't need saving. But perhaps she will allow me to be present. Meanwhile, Lila remained unaware of the depth of observation she was under. Her thoughts circled endlessly around the humiliation of the abandoned date. She replayed the entrance over and over, wondering if she had missed something, if she had somehow misread the situation. And yet, there was that moment, those few seconds, when his eyes had met hers. The intensity of that gaze had been startling, magnetic, leaving a spark of heat deep in her chest. She caught herself staring, quickly averting her eyes, cheeks burning. How dare she notice him after the embarrassment? Yet she couldn't help herself. Something about the man unsettled her, and yet intrigued her. He was commanding, dominant. And yet, there was no arrogance in his expression, only a quiet, deliberate interest that made her pulse quicken. Cale shifted slightly in his chair, straightening, and his gaze remained locked on her. There was no haste in his movements, only precision, calculation, and intent. He assessed her from across the room, noting the fine details, the subtle way she twisted the ring on her finger, the faint crease in her brow, the way her shoulders slumped with suppressed frustration. He catalogued every nuance, storing it, remembering it, committing it to memory. His lips curved in the faintest hint of a smile. She is intriguing. She is strong. She is mine. Not in ownership, exactly, but in the sense of someone he would watch, protect, and challenge in ways only he could. Cale knew the effect he had on people, he had seen it countless times, but this woman was different. She resisted, consciously or not, and that resistance only heightened the pull. As he contemplated his next move, Cale's mind drifted briefly to the concept of fate, a word he seldom entertained. Yet here it was, undeniable. He had been in many situations before, many encounters, but the timing of this, the precision of her abandonment, the intensity of her presence, it all felt orchestrated. Perhaps this is how it begins, he thought, a collision of paths that should not be ignored. The waiter returned, bringing a small dish that Lila had ordered, though she barely glanced at it. Cale noted the slight hesitation in her movements, the careful attention to manners even in discomfort. She was meticulous, aware, cautious. These were qualities he respected. And yet, she didn't see him yet. She didn't know he existed, not fully. She only felt the magnetic pull of the gaze, an awareness that something was off. Cale decided it was time to bridge the distance, to move beyond observation. Not abruptly, not in a way that would startle her, but deliberately. He raised his glass slightly, a subtle gesture, not enough to draw attention from the rest of the room, but enough for her to notice. Lila's eyes met his once more, briefly, and a spark passed between them, a fleeting acknowledgement that neither could ignore. Her heartbeat quickened. She looked away, pretending she hadn't noticed, yet her mind replayed the movement over and over. Who was he? Why was he looking at her like that? And most importantly, why did it feel inevitable? Cale studied her reaction carefully, noting the quick flush on her cheeks, the slight hesitation in her posture. Yes, he thought, there is curiosity. And desire. Both are present, intertwined. This will be interesting. Time seemed to stretch as he remained seated, a calculated observer, waiting for the perfect moment to act. Every detail was stored, every nuance logged, every subtle shift in expression noted. This was no ordinary encounter. Cale had never been wrong about these things before, and he would not be wrong about her. As Lila sipped her water, her thoughts spiraled between self-consciousness and fascination. She caught herself glancing back toward him repeatedly, each time feeling a jolt of electricity, a spark of something she couldn't name. He didn't smile, at least, not fully, but the faint curve of his lips suggested awareness, acknowledgement, and intent. She shook her head lightly, as if to dispel the feelings, but they lingered. He was impossible to ignore, impossible to dismiss. Her mind, for the first time in a long while, entertained the notion that perhaps abandonment could lead to something entirely unexpected, something thrilling, dangerous, and intoxicating. Cale shifted again, leaning forward slightly, a silent signal of intention. Not aggression, not arrogance, but presence. His eyes never left hers. He was patient, calculating, confident. And in that moment, he decided. The woman who had been abandoned, humiliated, left alone in a crowded restaurant, she would not leave without knowing him. The air between them seemed charged, heavy with unspoken words and unformed possibilities. Lila felt it too, a tension that made her chest tighten, her breath hitch. She was aware of him in a way she had never been aware of anyone before. He was close, yet distant, commanding, yet subtle. His presence dominated without overt action. And then, almost imperceptibly, he moved. Not across the room, not yet, but he adjusted his posture, placed his hands on the table with deliberate precision, and exhaled lightly, as though marking the moment, claiming it, acknowledging it. Lila felt the weight of that presence as though a gravitational force had shifted. She had never felt so observed, so noticed, so simultaneously exposed and safe. A shiver ran down her spine. She wanted to look away, to pretend she hadn't noticed, yet her body refused. Something in her recognized him, power, dominance, yet respect. A force that demanded attention, respect, perhaps even surrender. And yet, it was tempered with care, with awareness, with something she couldn't name. Cale's gaze softened fractionally, the first hint of warmth, and yet there was no loss of intensity, no diminution of authority. He was a force, a presence, a king among men, and he had noticed her. And in that moment, Lila understood that her evening, her night, her life perhaps, had changed in an instant. She didn't know who he was, she didn't know what he wanted, but she knew one thing: she could not ignore him. She could not walk away. And she could not, even if she wanted to, forget the intensity of that gaze. The restaurant buzzed around them, glasses clinking, murmurs of conversation, the faint scrape of silverware on plates. But within her small corner, Lila felt as though the rest of the world had disappeared. All that existed was the empty chair across from her, the lingering sting of her abandoned date, and the dark, commanding presence of the man who had been watching her with unblinking intensity. Her heart hammered in her chest. She sipped her water nervously, trying to steady her racing thoughts. Who is he? She wondered. Why is he looking at me like that? Her pulse quickened at the memory of his gaze, a strange mix of curiosity, command, and something she couldn't identify. Her fingers twined around the glass, leaving faint impressions in the condensation, as if her touch could ground her in the swirling storm of emotions inside her. Cale had risen from his chair, his movements deliberate and controlled, yet fluid, commanding attention without a single extraneous gesture. As he approached, Lila's breath caught. He was taller than she expected, his broad shoulders filling the space between the tables. His dark hair fell just slightly over his forehead, framing eyes that seemed to pierce directly into her thoughts. She felt a shiver run down her spine, a mix of fear and fascination. Are you all right? His voice was deep, smooth, carrying authority without arrogance. You were left waiting. Lila blinked, startled. The sound of his voice was like a low hum vibrating through her chest, resonating in a way that made her pulse leap. I'm fine, she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. Her cheeks burned with heat, her mind scrambling to compose itself. She was unaccustomed to this kind of direct attention, and yet, a part of her felt relieved, almost comforted. Cale's eyes never wavered. He noticed the slight tremor in her hands, the way her shoulders tensed and relaxed with each breath, the careful, measured movements of someone trying desperately to maintain composure in the face of embarrassment. She's stronger than she looks, he thought, yet vulnerable. Interesting. He pulled out the chair across from her without asking, a simple act of confidence, unchallenged, accepted by her in a mixture of surprise and curiosity. As he seated himself, the distance between them felt charged, alive, a magnetic force threading the air with anticipation. Lila fidgeted, glancing down at the table, at the napkin, at her untouched glass of water, unwilling to meet his gaze yet unable to look away. I'm Cale, he said simply, his tone measured, smooth, commanding without pressing. And you are? Lila, she replied, her voice still slightly unsteady. Lila Morgan. The name felt foreign on her tongue, as if saying it aloud made it more real, more tangible. She looked up at him cautiously, meeting his gaze for the briefest of moments before quickly averting her eyes. Cale studied her reaction carefully, noting the blush that colored her cheeks and the small, nervous gesture of her hands twisting the ring on her finger. He allowed a faint smile to curve his lips, though it was subtle, understated, a predator testing its curiosity rather than revealing satisfaction. She notices everything, yet she's unaware of how much she reveals, he thought, impressed. Lila's mind raced. He's imposing. Powerful. Something about him feels different, like he can see right through me. She tried to steady her breathing, attempting to act normal, yet the proximity, the presence, the intensity of his gaze made her acutely aware of every fluttering heartbeat, every stolen breath. Cale leaned slightly forward, his elbows resting lightly on the table, hands folded loosely. "I couldn't help but notice you were left alone," he said. "Most people would pretend not to see. But I don't ignore things that matter." Her pulse quickened. "Things that matter," she echoed internally, feeling a thrill of curiosity and confusion. Who was this man? Why did his words resonate so deeply, as though they carried weight beyond the surface? She found herself answering, despite her initial hesitation. I guess I've had worse evenings," she said softly, a half-smile tugging at her lips. Her voice was still shaky, but there was a spark of defiance, a tiny flame that refused to be extinguished. Cale's eyes lingered on her smile, noting the subtle confidence beneath the nervous exterior. There it is, the strength she tries to hide. He leaned back slightly, his gaze never leaving her face. "Worse evenings, huh? Then consider this one, potentially memorable." His tone carried a quiet promise, an undercurrent of intent that was impossible to ignore. Lila felt a shiver run down her spine. "Memorable?" she echoed, curiosity mixing with apprehension. She couldn't help but notice the faint edge in his words, the subtle tension that suggested he meant more than just a casual dinner conversation. "Yes," Cale replied, his gaze steady, unwavering. "I have a habit of noticing things most people miss. And I don't forget easily." Her mind whirled. Most people miss things. She remembered the way he had been watching her, the intensity of his focus, the way he had noticed her alone and unembarrassed by the surrounding attention. Something about him was unnerving yet thrilling, commanding yet oddly comforting. A brief silence fell between them, neither wanting to break it, both aware of the charged atmosphere threading the space. Lila fiddled with her napkin, hands twisting and untwisting the fabric as she tried to compose herself. Cale's presence seemed to anchor her simultaneously while sending a ripple of tension through her entire body. Finally, she asked, hesitantly, why are you looking at me like that?" The words slipped out before she could stop herself, a mix of curiosity, accusation, and intrigue. Cale's eyes darkened slightly, the faintest smirk tugging at his lips. "Looking at you? I'm observing. I notice when someone is interesting. You caught my attention." The intensity of his gaze made her heart pound. She had never felt this kind of scrutiny before, not from a stranger, not in a crowded room. And yet, she didn't feel threatened. She felt recognized. Seen. In a way she hadn't been seen in years. "Interesting," she echoed softly, her voice barely audible, a mix of disbelief and fascination. "Yes," Cale replied, leaning forward slightly again. "Most people blend into the background, unnoticed, unremarkable. You do not." Her cheeks burned hotter, a mixture of embarrassment and exhilaration. "He notices me, and he's saying it aloud." She had never experienced anything like this. Never had someone see through the exterior, past the anxious self-consciousness, into something deeper. Cale continued, his voice low, measured, commanding. "I'm curious, Lila. Most people don't hold my attention for long. You do. Tell me, why were you left alone tonight?" Her stomach knotted again. How much do I tell him? She hesitated, weighing the truth against instinct. My date didn't show up, she said finally, voice trembling slightly. I guess. I'm just here alone. Cale's lips curved into a faint, almost imperceptible smile. And yet you're still here. Sitting, composed, maintaining dignity even in discomfort. That's admirable. The compliment sent a warm surge through her chest. She blinked, surprised at the sincerity in his tone, and felt a small spark of connection that was both alarming and thrilling. Who is this man? She wondered. Why do I feel something I can't name? Cale noticed her gaze lingering, the flicker of curiosity, the hesitation. Do you always wait alone like this when plans fall through? He asked, his tone teasing yet probing, carefully balanced to draw her out without pressing too far. Lila hesitated, then laughed softly, a delicate sound that seemed to capture his attention fully. No, not usually, she admitted. But, tonight. I suppose I had no choice. Her voice carried the faintest trace of humor mixed with vulnerability. Cale inclined his head slightly, acknowledging her response, his eyes dark and intense. Good. Then allow me to offer company. For tonight, at least. Her breath hitched. Company? From him? The idea was both terrifying and exhilarating. Her mind raced. What did he mean? Was he serious? And yet, the intensity of his presence, the magnetic pull, the undeniable command in his demeanor, left her unable to refuse. She nodded slowly, words failing her. I'd like that, she said finally, almost in a whisper. Cale's faint smile deepened, just slightly. Good, he thought. The night is only beginning. And with that, the first conversation, tentative and charged, had begun. Words had been exchanged, boundaries subtly tested, tension carefully balanced. In that quiet corner of the bustling restaurant, a connection had been forged, fragile yet undeniable, a spark that neither could ignore. Lila's heart raced, anticipation mingling with nervousness. She had no idea who this man truly was, what he wanted, or where this encounter would lead. But something inside her, an instinct, a pull, a thrill, told her this night would be far from ordinary. Cale, observing her reaction with sharp precision, knew the same. The night had shifted. Paths had crossed. And for the first time in a long while, he felt that rare, intoxicating certainty. Some encounters were not accidents. Some connections were inevitable. The hum of the restaurant, the clatter of plates, the murmur of conversations, all faded into background noise. All that remained was the undeniable gravity between them, a pull neither could deny, a connection that promised tension, intrigue, and the beginnings of something far more profound than either could yet comprehend. The soft glow of the candle flickered between them, casting dancing shadows across the table. The hum of conversation around them had faded into a muted background, almost as if the rest of the world had been erased, leaving only the two of them in this moment. Lila's nerves buzzed with a strange mixture of excitement and trepidation. She couldn't quite place it, the pull, the tension, the magnetic energy radiating from the man seated across from her, but it was undeniable. Cale leaned slightly forward, resting his forearms lightly on the table, his fingers steepled. His eyes, dark and compelling, never left hers. Every movement, every glance, every subtle shift in his posture was deliberate, controlled, and impossible to ignore. Lila felt her chest tighten, her breath catching in her throat. Why am I so aware of him? She wondered. Why do I feel like every thought, every heartbeat, is amplified when he's near? I never see people like you, Cale said, his voice low and deliberate, carrying an edge of curiosity. Not often. You stand out. Lila blinked, startled by the compliment, and felt her cheeks warm. Stand out? She echoed softly, unsure if she had heard him correctly. Her heart raced at the sound of his voice, steady and commanding. Yes, he replied, a faint smirk tugging at the corner of his lips. You don't try to impress, don't try to blend in, and yet, everyone notices you. I notice you. Her pulse quickened. Not everyone notices, but he does. She felt a thrill of both fear and exhilaration. I guess I've never thought about it that way, she said softly. She fiddled with the napkin on the table, twisting it nervously, yet her eyes kept darting to his, drawn like a magnet. Cale's gaze held, unwavering. He leaned back slightly, observing the subtle rise and fall of her chest, the small movements of her hands, the way her lips parted slightly as she considered his words. She's beautiful. Not just in appearance, but in presence. In strength. In the vulnerability she carries without apology. Lila felt a shiver run down her spine. There was something in the intensity of his attention that was both terrifying and exhilarating. She tried to focus on something else, the candle, the soft hum of the restaurant, the faint clatter of dishes, but she couldn't. He had a way of dominating her awareness without moving a muscle, of claiming her attention as if it were his by right. I've never had someone notice me like this before, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Her fingers trembled slightly as she clasped them together in her lap. She felt exposed, yet strangely safe, as though his presence alone provided some unspoken protection. Cale tilted his head, studying her. Notice you? His voice carried a quiet amusement, though his eyes remained serious. I don't just notice, Lila. I observe. I remember. And I care. The words hit her like a jolt of electricity. She felt her stomach twist with a combination of anticipation and apprehension. Care? She thought. What does that mean coming from him? Who is he really? A faint smile tugged at the corners of her lips. You're different, she said softly, almost hesitantly. I don't know why, but I feel like I could talk to you. Cale's smirk deepened, but there was no arrogance, only intrigue. Good, he said. Because I don't often meet people who can hold my attention. You do. You're not like anyone I've encountered before. She felt heat rise to her cheeks. Hold his attention. Me? The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. She had never been noticed in this way before, and the intensity of it left her breathless. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was heavy, charged with unspoken questions, unspoken desires, and the magnetic pull that drew them closer even as they remained seated across from one another. Lila felt her pulse thundering in her ears, her thoughts a tangled mess of curiosity, fear, and anticipation. I have to ask, Cale said finally, breaking the silence. Why were you left alone tonight? Was it intentional? His gaze bore into hers, sharp, assessing, but tempered with a subtle warmth that made her feel seen rather than judged. Lila swallowed, her throat dry. I don't know, she admitted. He never showed up. I waited, and then, well, I was left alone. Her voice wavered, and she glanced down at her hands, twisting the ring on her finger nervously. Cale leaned forward slightly, the faintest edge of authority in his posture. You didn't deserve that, he said quietly. No one should be left to feel that way. Not you. Her breath hitched. His words carried weight, sincerity, and an unspoken promise of protection. He means it, she realized. He really does care. A faint, almost imperceptible smile curved her lips. "Thank you," she said softly. "For noticing, and for saying that." Cale's gaze softened fractionally, and he leaned back in his chair, studying her with measured intent. "You're welcome," he said simply. "It's rare to meet someone who commands attention without demanding it." "You do. And I intend to understand why." Her heart raced at the subtle intensity in his voice. There was something magnetic, irresistible about him, a pull that made her pulse quicken and her mind spin. She had no idea who he was, what he wanted, or what this night might bring, yet she felt drawn to him, as though some unseen force was guiding her attention, her curiosity, her very being toward him. Cale shifted slightly, resting his elbows on the table again, hands steepled. "Tell me," he said, his tone both commanding and inviting, "what do you enjoy? What makes you, who you are?" Lila hesitated, caught off guard by the directness of the question. No one had ever asked her that before, not genuinely, not with such intent. She glanced down at her hands again, twisting the napkin nervously. I like quiet moments," she said finally, her voice soft. "Books, walks in the park, music that makes you feel something real. I enjoy observing, noticing, things that others might miss." Cale's eyes darkened slightly, a spark of approval evident. "Interesting," he said. "You notice the details. You see what others overlook. That explains a lot." She tilted her head, curious. "Explains what?" He leaned back slightly, smirk returning faintly. "Why you captured my attention." His words were deliberate, measured, and impossible to ignore. Lila felt her chest tighten, her mind swirling with the intensity of the statement. For the next several minutes, they spoke quietly, carefully, a dance of words, glances, and subtle gestures. Lila found herself relaxing slowly, her nervous energy mingling with curiosity and intrigue. Cale, ever the observer, noted every nuance, her laughter, the way her eyes lit up when she mentioned her interests, the delicate way she sipped her water, the faint blush that colored her cheeks at his subtle compliments. It was a slow unraveling, a tentative bridge of connection forming between them. The tension in the air was palpable, yet there was a rhythm to it, a cadence that neither wanted to break. They were learning, testing, drawing lines without crossing them, exploring boundaries without forcing them. And all the while, Lila couldn't shake the feeling that her life had shifted in this moment. She had come to a blind date expecting disappointment, humiliation, and solitude. Instead, she had encountered a man who saw her, who acknowledged her presence, who made her feel important. Seen. Desired. Cale felt it too, the unspoken connection, the spark of interest and intrigue that neither could ignore. He had been in many situations before, met countless people, but there was something about her that defied his experience. She was unpredictable, authentic, and entirely captivating. As the evening wore on, they continued to converse quietly, each moment stretching, charged with unspoken meaning and delicate tension. The restaurant around them seemed to fade further into the background, leaving only the subtle dance of glances, words, and fleeting touches that neither could resist nor fully articulate. By the time the waiter returned with her meal, neither of them seemed to notice. Lila's nervousness had softened into a tentative comfort, her heart racing yet steady in a strange, exhilarating way. Cale's presence was commanding, undeniable, yet it carried a rare warmth, a deliberate attention that made her feel safe. And as she took her first bite, meeting Cale's gaze once more across the table, she realized, with a thrill of anticipation and a hint of fear, that her night was no longer about a failed blind date. It was about him. About them. About the undeniable connection that had sparked between two people who had, until this moment, been strangers. The first conversation had begun, and neither of them would ever be the same. The restaurant's low hum of conversation seemed to shift slightly, almost imperceptibly, as though the world itself had adjusted to the tension at Lila's corner table. She was laughing softly at something Cale had said, a teasing remark, subtle and measured, that carried just enough charm to make her heart flutter, but her smile faltered when movement at the entrance caught her attention. Her stomach tightened. There, framed in the doorway, was the man she had been waiting for all evening. The one who had abandoned her, leaving her humiliated and alone. He sauntered in with an air of arrogance, a smug grin tugging at the corners of his lips. His eyes swept the restaurant casually, as if nothing mattered, until they landed on her. Lila froze, a shiver running down her spine. He's here, she thought, her pulse quickening with a mix of dread, embarrassment, and irritation. Her hands tightened around her fork, the sudden rush of anxiety threatening to undo the fragile calm she had built with Cale. Cale, ever observant, noted her reaction instantly. The slight tightening of her shoulders, the quick glance toward the entrance, the barely perceptible shift in her posture, it all spoke volumes. His eyes narrowed subtly, a flicker of protective instinct sparking beneath the calm surface he so carefully maintained. The man approached, clearly expecting a warm reception. "Hey, sorry I'm late," he said smoothly, though the charm in his tone rang hollow. "Traffic was." Cale's voice cut through the air before Lila could respond, low and measured, carrying a quiet authority that made the room seem smaller, tighter. "You're late." The man blinked, taken aback by the tone, the command behind it. Yeah, Cale leaned back slightly, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. "You left her waiting." 15 minutes, I believe." His gaze, dark and unflinching, bore into the man with a precision that made him step back slightly, as if physically struck by the presence alone. Lila felt a thrill of astonishment mixed with relief. "He's defending me," she thought, heat rising to her cheeks. The man's grin faltered. I didn't think." Cale's eyes sharpened. "Clearly, you didn't think enough." The words were simple, yet carried a weight that left no room for argument. Lila noticed the subtle shift in the man's posture, the way he unconsciously recoiled under Cale's commanding gaze. It was a silent assertion of authority, dominance without physicality, yet utterly undeniable. Lila felt a shiver of both excitement and awe. She had never experienced someone stepping into her space with such quiet power, someone asserting presence and control in a way that left no room for nonsense. Her blind date's arrogance crumbled under Cale's gaze, and she couldn't help but feel a surge of respect, and attraction, for the man across from her. "You left her alone," Cale continued, his tone calm but lethal in its precision. "That is not acceptable. You apologize, or you leave." Her date swallowed nervously. I'm sorry," he said finally, though the apology sounded weak, forced. Cale's gaze didn't soften. "Do you mean it?" The man hesitated. Lila's stomach twisted. He's not going to get away with it, she thought. Her pulse quickened, a strange mix of fear and anticipation flooding her senses. Cale's presence was overwhelming, a magnetic force she couldn't ignore, and she realized, with sudden clarity, that she didn't want to. "I said I'm sorry," her date repeated, voice cracking slightly under the weight of Cale's authority. Cale's smirk deepened faintly, just enough to convey both amusement and warning. "Good. Now leave. She doesn't need your presence to feel complete." The man hesitated, then, realizing he had no choice, retreated. Lila watched him go, a mixture of relief and amazement coursing through her. She looked at Cale, eyes wide, and felt heat rising to her cheeks. You didn't have to do that," she said softly, her voice tinged with wonder. Cale leaned slightly forward, gaze unwavering, his voice low and measured. I did, he said simply. No one leaves someone I notice humiliated without consequence. Her breath caught. There was something about the way he said it, the quiet certainty, the effortless command, that made her pulse race. She felt simultaneously exposed and protected, vulnerable and thrilled. Her mind whirled with questions she didn't dare ask aloud, but the magnetic pull of his presence left her unable to look away. For several moments, they simply sat across from one another, the air between them charged with unspoken words, subtle tension, and a growing connection that neither could deny. Lila's nerves, once frazzled from embarrassment, had shifted into something entirely different: anticipation. Excitement. A fluttering, thrilling awareness that something significant had begun tonight. Cale studied her carefully, noting every subtle shift in expression, every twitch of her fingers, every glance she allowed to meet his. He noticed the way her breathing had steadied slightly, how her posture had relaxed, yet retained a hint of tension, a subtle strength that spoke volumes. She's resilient, he thought. Strong. Yet open. Perfectly captivating. Lila, meanwhile, found herself watching him as intently as he watched her. There was something in his presence that demanded attention, something impossible to ignore. She felt drawn to him, as if by invisible threads, pulled toward the intensity of his gaze, the quiet authority in his movements, the subtle warmth beneath his commanding exterior. Why did you stay? She asked softly, curiosity mingling with awe. Why didn't you leave like everyone else? Cale's gaze softened fractionally, just enough to reveal a hint of warmth, a trace of the man beneath the alpha presence. Because you caught my attention, he said simply. And when something, or someone, captures my attention, I don't let it go easily. Her heart raced at the words. She had never experienced anything like this, never had someone look at her with such intensity, such certainty, such unspoken promise. She felt seen, acknowledged, desired, not in a shallow, superficial way, but in a way that resonated deep within her, stirring something primal, thrilling, and terrifying all at once. Lila's mind struggled to keep pace with the swirl of emotions, the rapid-fire questions, the undeniable pull she felt toward him. Who is he really? She wondered. Why do I feel like I've known him far longer than these few minutes? Cale, sensing her thoughts, leaned slightly closer, a subtle, controlled movement that sent a shiver down her spine. His eyes softened, yet retained that edge of authority, of command, of power tempered with care. Relax, he said quietly. You're safe. Here. With me. Her breath hitched at the words, and she felt her pulse quicken, her senses heightened, as though the room itself had narrowed to the space between them. Every glance, every word, every subtle gesture carried weight, charged with meaning beyond the surface. For several moments, they simply sat in silence, the world outside fading away. The failed blind date, the embarrassment, the humiliation, all seemed distant, irrelevant, replaced by the magnetic intensity of the man across from her. She felt a rush of gratitude, awe, and something more primal, something stirring deep within her chest that left her simultaneously breathless and exhilarated. Cale's gaze softened further, just enough to convey reassurance, curiosity, and something deeper that Lila could not yet name. You're remarkable, he said quietly. Not for how you look, or what others think, but for how you carry yourself. Even in moments like this. Her cheeks burned at the sincerity, at the weight of the words. He sees me, truly sees me, she realized, and a thrill coursed through her veins. She had expected disappointment, humiliation, perhaps a fleeting moment of pity. Instead, she had encountered a man who noticed, who understood, who protected, and who, in ways she could not yet comprehend, desired her. The rest of the evening stretched on, quiet yet charged, with the subtle dance of glances, words, and growing connection. Lila felt herself drawn into his orbit, aware of every nuance, every small gesture, every carefully measured word. And as the night wore on, she realized, with a mixture of awe and anticipation, that this encounter, unexpected, unplanned, and utterly transformative, was only the beginning. After the brief, yet decisive, confrontation with her abandoned blind date, the restaurant seemed to shrink, the ambient noise fading into a gentle murmur that framed the corner table like a world unto itself. Lila still felt her pulse hammering from the encounter, but beneath the adrenaline and surprise, a new sensation had taken root, a delicate thread of trust, of anticipation, and of something dangerously close to fascination. Cale remained across from her, calm, composed, a steady force that somehow drew her into his orbit without effort. The smoldering intensity in his dark eyes had not waned. If anything, it had deepened, shifting subtly into something softer, something more intimate. She caught herself staring, as if she could read him just by the slightest twitch of his lips, the almost imperceptible raise of an eyebrow. "You're quiet," he observed, his voice low, warm, yet commanding just enough to make her straighten in her chair. "Do I make you nervous?" Lila's lips curved into a hesitant smile. "A little," she admitted. "But, not in a bad way." Cale's eyes darkened, curiosity and something far more primal mingling in his gaze. "Not in a bad way," he repeated, voice teasing, almost a challenge. "That's an interesting choice of words. Most people can't speak when I make them feel aware." Her cheeks flushed at the subtle power behind his words. You make me aware," she whispered, the confession barely audible over the soft hum of conversation around them. Yet the moment it left her lips, the words felt impossible to retract. She realized with a jolt that she didn't want to. Cale leaned forward slightly, the faintest smirk tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Aware of what?" he asked, his tone a perfect balance of curiosity and teasing. "Of everything," she admitted softly. "Of myself, of you, of this moment." Her voice wavered slightly, and she felt heat rising to her cheeks. The intensity of the gaze he fixed on her made her pulse accelerate, each heartbeat resonating in a way that left her both terrified and exhilarated. Cale's eyes softened fractionally, yet his presence remained commanding. "Everything, huh?" he said. "Interesting. You notice details most people ignore. I can see it in your eyes, in the way you carry yourself, even in the small gestures you make without thinking." She swallowed hard, feeling exposed yet thrilled. Do you always notice people like that?" she asked, curiosity mingling with nervousness. "Not everyone," he replied, his voice low, deliberate. "But you're different. You stand out." Lila's stomach twisted in anticipation. There was something intoxicating about the way he spoke, about the quiet certainty and authority that seemed to underline every word. She felt a rush of warmth and longing, a desire she didn't dare fully acknowledge yet, but could not ignore. A waiter approached briefly, offering dessert menus, and Lila barely glanced at it. Cale noticed her distraction, the way her gaze kept drifting back to him, and he allowed a faint smile, approving and predatory at the same time, to curve his lips. "Lila," he said softly, leaning slightly closer. The subtle movement sent a shiver down her spine. "Tell me, what are you afraid of?" Her eyes widened, caught off guard by the question. Her mind raced. She had been cautious for so long, guarding her emotions, her trust, her heart. Yet something about the way he asked, calm, patient, yet intent, made her want to answer, made her feel that she could. I guess," she hesitated, her fingers fidgeting with the edge of her napkin. "I'm afraid of being humiliated." Of being overlooked. Of being abandoned again. Cale's gaze softened, a flicker of warmth cutting through the intensity, though the commanding edge never left his presence. You shouldn't fear that, he said quietly. Not tonight. Not with me. Her chest tightened at the words. Not with him. The thought alone sent a thrill coursing through her veins, a fluttering mix of excitement, nervousness, and something deeper she didn't fully understand. She dared to meet his gaze again, her voice soft. How can you be so sure? Cale's smirk returned faintly, subtle yet knowing. Because I notice. I remember. And I protect what I care about. The quiet confidence in his voice, the measured way he delivered each word, left no room for doubt or misinterpretation. She felt her pulse racing, her senses heightened, each word wrapping around her mind and heart like a current she couldn't escape. For several moments, silence fell between them, a charged, deliberate quiet that spoke more than words ever could. Lila felt the heat of his gaze like a tangible force, drawing her attention, her thoughts, her very being toward him. She realized with a jolt that she had never experienced this before, never felt seen, acknowledged, desired in a way that transcended surface-level attraction. Cale studied her carefully, noting the small details that revealed her inner tension, the subtle tightening of her shoulders, the faint blush on her cheeks, the way her fingers twisted the ring on her finger almost unconsciously. Each gesture, each expression, spoke volumes to him, feeding the growing fascination and intensity he felt. You have a fire inside you, he said finally, voice low, deliberate. A strength most people would miss. But I see it. Her heart skipped a beat. She had spent years hiding, blending in, fearing judgment and rejection. Yet here was a man who not only noticed her strength but respected it, acknowledged it, and seemed drawn to it. She felt a thrill, a shiver of anticipation and longing that left her breathless. Cale leaned slightly closer, just enough that she could feel the subtle warmth radiating from him, the faint brush of his presence against her awareness. Lila, he said, his voice a whisper now, intimate and commanding, do you trust me? The question struck her like lightning. Her mind reeled, weighing caution against the undeniable pull she felt toward him. And yet, without fully understanding why, she nodded slowly. I think I do, she admitted softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Cale's eyes softened just slightly, approval mingling with a flicker of something deeper, desire, fascination, intent. Good, he murmured. Because trust is the first step. And I promise. I won't betray it. Lila felt a rush of warmth and relief, her chest tightening as the weight of the evening, the humiliation, the abandoned date, the nervous anticipation, shifted into something entirely new. She felt seen, acknowledged, protected, and desired in a way that left her simultaneously exhilarated and terrified. The waiter returned briefly with drinks, and Lila found herself momentarily distracted by the simple act of pouring a sip of water. Cale noticed her distraction, and a faint, teasing smirk tugged at his lips. You're nervous, he observed softly, though the statement carried no judgment, only amusement and curiosity. I guess I am, she admitted, feeling heat rise to her cheeks once more. But, not in a bad way. Cale leaned forward slightly, eyes darkening with a quiet intensity. Not in a bad way, he echoed, a faint smile playing at the corners of his lips. That's good. You should feel aware, alive. Not frightened. Not timid. Aware. Alive. Lila's pulse quickened at the words, each one resonating deep within her chest, stirring a mixture of excitement, anticipation, and an unspoken desire she barely dared acknowledge. She realized, with a thrill and a hint of fear, that this evening, unexpected, unplanned, and utterly transformative, was changing her in ways she had never imagined. Cale noticed the subtle shift in her demeanor, the softening of tension, the spark of curiosity and intrigue igniting in her eyes. He allowed the faintest, approving nod, a silent acknowledgement that their connection was deepening, that the first hints of something powerful and undeniable had begun. And as the candle flickered between them, casting dancing shadows on the table, Lila understood, with both excitement and trepidation, that this was more than a chance encounter. More than a night of unexpected attention. This was the first spark of a connection that neither of them could, or would, ignore. The soft clatter of the restaurant faded into the background as Cale's gaze remained fixed on Lila. Every movement she made, every subtle shift in posture, every blink and breath seemed magnified under his watchful eyes. He leaned back slightly, steepling his fingers as though considering something, a faint smirk tugging at the corner of his lips. Lila, aware of his intensity, felt her heartbeat quicken. There was an unspoken energy between them, a charge that seemed to vibrate through the air, heavy and unavoidable. "You've been through a lot tonight," Cale said, his voice low, deliberate, carrying that quiet authority that seemed to make the space between them shrink. "Abandoned, humiliated, left alone. And yet here you are. Calm. Composed. Not completely broken." Lila's lips curved into a small, hesitant smile. I try," she admitted softly, her fingers twisting nervously around her napkin. "I guess. I just don't like letting things control me. Even when it's hard." Cale's eyes darkened slightly, intrigued. "Control. Yes, that's interesting. Most people don't understand control. They run from it, resist it, or they hide behind false facades." He leaned forward slightly, the weight of his presence pressing against her awareness. You handle it differently. You face it. You endure. You adapt." Her pulse raced. Endure, adapt. The word struck a chord deep within her, exposing a side of herself she rarely acknowledged. She had spent years navigating life carefully, hiding her vulnerability, masking her fears. And yet here was a man who saw through it all, not with judgment, but with an almost predatory curiosity that left her simultaneously unnerved and captivated. Cale's smirk deepened faintly. "I like that," he murmured. "There's a fire in you. A strength that draws me in. And I want to test it." Her eyes widened, heart fluttering at the unexpected words. "Test it," she echoed, uncertain, a mixture of curiosity and apprehension threading her voice. "What do you mean?" He leaned closer, his gaze locking with hers in a way that made the rest of the world disappear. "A challenge," he said softly, deliberately. "Something, to see how far you're willing to go. How strong you really are. I want to see if you can trust me, even when it's difficult." Lila's breath hitched. The proposition was both thrilling and terrifying. A challenge? From him? Her pulse raced at the thought, a strange mix of fear and exhilaration coursing through her veins. She had never encountered someone so confident, so commanding, so utterly in control, and yet, there was something in the way he spoke, the subtle warmth beneath the intensity, that made her want to accept, to rise to the challenge, even without fully understanding what it entailed. "And what happens if I fail?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, caught between curiosity and apprehension. Cale's eyes darkened, a flicker of amusement in the depths. "Failure isn't an option," he said, voice low, deliberate, and magnetic. "Not with me. You'll learn, adapt, or you'll see that some things are worth the risk. Some challenges are worth facing head-on." Her pulse quickened further. There was a dangerous allure in his words, a tension that threaded through her chest and tightened her stomach. She felt simultaneously drawn and cautious, aware that accepting his proposition could change everything, and yet, the thought of saying no felt impossible. Cale leaned back slightly, his gaze never leaving hers. "I won't push you too far," he said, tone measured, almost reassuring. "But I will see what you're capable of. I will see the fire that burns within you, the strength you carry. And I'll be here, every step of the way." Lila's fingers trembled slightly as she considered his words. There was an undeniable pull in them, a magnetic force that seemed to draw her toward him. She felt a thrill of anticipation, a spark of desire, and a deepening sense of trust forming in the pit of her stomach. She realized, with a jolt, that she wanted this challenge, not despite the risk, but because of it. She began, her voice wavering. She hesitated, then drew a steadying breath. "I accept." Cale's smirk widened slightly, approval evident in the faint curve of his lips. "Good," he murmured. "This won't be easy. Some things will test you, mentally, emotionally, even physically. But I promise, you'll come out stronger. And you'll learn more about yourself than you ever imagined." Her heart raced at the implication. The proposition was both thrilling and terrifying, yet beneath the fear was a spark of exhilaration she couldn't deny. "I want to rise to this, for him, for myself," she thought, a surge of determination mingling with the fluttering anticipation in her chest. Cale leaned closer again, just enough that she could feel the subtle warmth radiating from him. "And Lila, remember this," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper, intimate and commanding. "No matter what happens, I see you. I notice you. And I won't let anyone, undermine that." Her chest tightened at the words, a rush of emotion flooding through her. She felt seen, protected, desired, and challenged all at once. There was something intoxicating, nearly overwhelming, about the intensity of his attention, the quiet certainty in his presence, and the promise of the challenge he offered. For several moments, they simply sat in silence, the charged tension between them humming like a living entity. Lila's mind raced with anticipation, curiosity, and a fluttering mix of fear and excitement. She understood, with a sudden clarity, that this was more than a game, more than a challenge, it was a turning point. A test of trust, strength, and connection that neither of them could ignore. Cale's gaze softened just slightly, approval mingling with the faintest hint of desire. "Are you ready?" he asked quietly, voice low and deliberate, drawing her attention like a magnet. Lila took a deep breath, feeling the electric pull of the moment, the thrill of the challenge, and the warmth of his presence. "Yes," she whispered, her voice steady despite the fluttering in her chest. "I'm ready." Cale's smirk returned faintly, subtle yet knowing. "Because I notice. I remember. And I protect what I care about." The quiet confidence in his voice, the measured way he delivered each word, left no room for doubt or misinterpretation. She felt her pulse racing, her senses heightened, each word wrapping around her mind and heart like a current she couldn't escape. For several moments, silence fell between them, a charged, deliberate quiet that spoke more than words ever could. Lila felt the heat of his gaze like a tangible force, drawing her attention, her thoughts, her very being toward him. She realized with a jolt that she had never experienced this before, never felt seen, acknowledged, desired in a way that transcended surface-level attraction. Cale studied her carefully, noting the small details that revealed her inner tension, the subtle tightening of her shoulders, the faint blush on her cheeks, the way her fingers twisted the ring on her finger almost unconsciously. Each gesture, each expression, spoke volumes to him, feeding the growing fascination and intensity he felt. "You have a fire inside you," he said finally, voice low, deliberate. A strength most people would miss. But I see it. Her heart skipped a beat. She had spent years hiding, blending in, fearing judgment and rejection. Yet here was a man who not only noticed her strength but respected it, acknowledged it, and seemed drawn to it. She felt a thrill, a shiver of anticipation and longing that left her breathless. Cale leaned slightly closer, just enough that she could feel the subtle warmth radiating from him, the faint brush of his presence against her awareness. "Lila," he said, his voice a whisper now, intimate and commanding, "do you trust me?" The question struck her like lightning. Her mind reeled, weighing caution against the undeniable pull she felt toward him. And yet, without fully understanding why, she nodded slowly. I think I do," she admitted softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Cale's eyes softened just slightly, approval mingling with a flicker of something deeper, desire, fascination, intent. "Good," he murmured. "Because trust is the first step. And I promise. I won't betray it." Lila felt a rush of warmth and relief, her chest tightening as the weight of the evening, the humiliation, the abandoned date, the nervous anticipation, shifted into something entirely new. She felt seen, acknowledged, protected, and desired in a way that left her simultaneously exhilarated and terrified. The waiter returned briefly with drinks, and Lila found herself momentarily distracted by the simple act of pouring a sip of water. Cale noticed her distraction, and a faint, teasing smirk tugged at his lips. "You're nervous," he observed softly, though the statement carried no judgment, only amusement and curiosity. I guess I am," she admitted, feeling heat rise to her cheeks once more. "But, not in a bad way." Cale leaned forward slightly, eyes darkening with a quiet intensity. "Not in a bad way," he echoed, a faint smile playing at the corners of his lips. "That's good. You should feel aware, alive. Not frightened. Not timid. Aware. Alive." Lila's pulse quickened at the words, each one resonating deep within her chest, stirring a mixture of excitement, anticipation, and an unspoken desire she barely dared acknowledge. She realized, with a thrill and a hint of fear, that this evening, unexpected, unplanned, and utterly transformative, was changing her in ways she had never imagined. Cale noticed the subtle shift in her demeanor, the softening of tension, the spark of curiosity and intrigue igniting in her eyes. He allowed the faintest, approving nod, a silent acknowledgement that their connection was deepening, that the first hints of something powerful and undeniable had begun. And as the candle flickered between them, casting dancing shadows on the table, Lila understood, with both excitement and trepidation, that this was more than a chance encounter. More than a night of unexpected attention. This was the first spark of a connection that neither of them could, or would, ignore. The soft clatter of the restaurant faded into the background as Cale's gaze remained fixed on Lila. Every movement she made, every subtle shift in posture, every blink and breath seemed magnified under his watchful eyes. He leaned back slightly, steepling his fingers as though considering something, a faint smirk tugging at the corner of his lips. Lila, aware of his intensity, felt her heartbeat quicken. There was an unspoken energy between them, a charge that seemed to vibrate through the air, heavy and unavoidable. "You've been through a lot tonight," Cale said, his voice low, deliberate, carrying that quiet authority that seemed to make the space between them shrink. "Abandoned, humiliated, left alone. And yet here you are. Calm. Composed. Not completely broken." Lila's lips curved into a small, hesitant smile. I try," she admitted softly, her fingers twisting nervously around her napkin. "I guess. I just don't like letting things control me. Even when it's hard." Cale's eyes darkened slightly, intrigued. Control. Yes, that's interesting. Most people don't understand control. They run from it, resist it, or they hide behind false facades. He leaned forward slightly, the weight of his presence pressing against her awareness. You handle it differently. You face it. You endure. You adapt. Her pulse raced. Endure, adapt. The word struck a chord deep within her, exposing a side of herself she rarely acknowledged. She had spent years navigating life carefully, hiding her vulnerability, masking her fears. And yet here was a man who saw through it all, not with judgment, but with an almost predatory curiosity that left her simultaneously unnerved and captivated. Cale's smirk deepened faintly. I like that, he murmured. There's a fire in you. A strength that draws me in. And I want to test it. Her eyes widened, heart fluttering at the unexpected words. Test it, she echoed, uncertain, a mixture of curiosity and apprehension threading her voice. What do you mean? He leaned closer, his gaze locking with hers in a way that made the rest of the world disappear. A challenge, he said softly, deliberately. Something, to see how far you're willing to go. How strong you really are. I want to see if you can trust me, even when it's difficult. Lila's breath hitched. The proposition was both thrilling and terrifying. A challenge? From him? Her pulse raced at the thought, a strange mix of fear and exhilaration coursing through her veins. She had never encountered someone so confident, so commanding, so utterly in control, and yet, there was something in the way he spoke, the subtle warmth beneath the intensity, that made her want to accept, to rise to the challenge, even without fully understanding what it entailed. And, what happens if I fail? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper, caught between curiosity and apprehension. Cale's eyes darkened, a flicker of amusement in the depths. Failure isn't an option, he said, voice low, deliberate, and magnetic. Not with me. You'll learn, adapt, or you'll see that some things are worth the risk. Some challenges are worth facing head-on. Her pulse quickened further. There was a dangerous allure in his words, a tension that threaded through her chest and tightened her stomach. She felt simultaneously drawn and cautious, aware that accepting his proposition could change everything, and yet, the thought of saying no felt impossible. Cale leaned back slightly, his gaze never leaving hers. I won't push you too far, he said, tone measured, almost reassuring. But I will see what you're capable of. I will see the fire that burns within you, the strength you carry. And I'll be here, every step of the way. Lila's fingers trembled slightly as she considered his words. There was an undeniable pull in them, a magnetic force that seemed to draw her toward him. She felt a thrill of anticipation, a spark of desire, and a deepening sense of trust forming in the pit of her stomach. She realized, with a jolt, that she wanted this challenge, not despite the risk, but because of it. She began, her voice wavering. She hesitated, then drew a steadying breath. I accept. Cale's smirk widened slightly, approval evident in the faint curve of his lips. Good, he murmured. This won't be easy. Some things will test you, mentally, emotionally, even physically. But I promise, you'll come out stronger. And you'll learn more about yourself than you ever imagined. Her heart raced at the implication. The proposition was both thrilling and terrifying, yet beneath the fear was a spark of exhilaration she couldn't deny. I want to rise to this, for him, for myself, she thought, a surge of determination mingling with the fluttering anticipation in her chest. Cale leaned closer again, just enough that she could feel the subtle warmth radiating from him. And Lila, remember this, he said, his voice dropping to a whisper, intimate and commanding. No matter what happens, I see you. I notice you. And I won't let anyone undermine that. Her chest tightened at the words, a rush of emotion flooding through her. She felt seen, protected, desired, and challenged all at once. There was something intoxicating, nearly overwhelming, about the intensity of his attention, the quiet certainty in his presence, and the promise of the challenge he offered. For several moments, they simply sat in silence, the charged tension between them humming like a living entity. Lila's mind raced with anticipation, curiosity, and a fluttering mix of fear and excitement. She understood, with a sudden clarity, that this was more than a game, more than a challenge. It was a turning point. A test of trust, strength, and connection that neither of them could ignore. Cale's gaze softened just slightly, approval mingling with the faintest hint of desire. "Are you ready?" he asked quietly, voice low and deliberate, drawing her attention like a magnet. Lila took a deep breath, feeling the electric pull of the moment, the thrill of the challenge, and the warmth of his presence. "Yes," she whispered, her voice steady despite the fluttering in her chest. "I'm ready." Cale's smirk returned faintly, the approval clear in the subtle curve of his lips. "Good," he murmured. "Because some things are worth the risk. And some are worth fighting for." As the candle flickered between them, casting dancing shadows on their faces, Lila realized, with a mixture of fear, exhilaration, and longing, that this challenge was just the beginning. The pull between them was undeniable, magnetic, and charged with possibilities she could neither predict nor resist. And in that moment, she understood that her life, her choices, and her heart had shifted irrevocably. The evening had begun with abandonment and humiliation, yet here she was, on the cusp of something thrilling, dangerous, and utterly transformative. Cale's challenge was not just a test, it was an invitation. An invitation to trust, to grow, to confront her fears, and to embrace the magnetic, intoxicating pull of a man who refused to let her remain unseen. Her heartbeat echoed in her chest, a rhythmic drum of anticipation and exhilaration. She knew, with a thrilling certainty, that nothing would ever be the same. Not tonight. Not after him. Not after this moment. The night deepened around them, the soft glow of candlelight casting delicate shadows on the table. The world outside the restaurant seemed distant, muted, almost irrelevant, as though the moment they shared existed in a separate realm. Lila felt her heartbeat thrum in her chest, her thoughts a tangled web of anticipation, fear, and fascination. Every glance from Cale sent a shiver racing down her spine, every subtle gesture seemed charged with unspoken meaning. Cale leaned slightly closer, the faint warmth radiating from him brushing against her awareness. His dark eyes held hers, unwavering, intense, as if he could see into the deepest, most hidden corners of her mind. Lila felt a flutter in her chest she couldn't explain, a pull that seemed almost magnetic. "You're different," he said softly, voice low and deliberate, carrying that familiar mix of authority and intrigue. "Most people, they don't make me feel like this. Like I need to pay attention, like I need to focus entirely. You do." Her cheeks flushed. "Me?" she whispered, almost disbelieving. She felt a surge of exhilaration, but beneath it, a subtle thread of vulnerability tugged at her. Why does he make me feel so exposed? So aware? Cale's lips curved faintly in a smirk. "Yes, you," he said, leaning back just enough to maintain the teasing distance, yet close enough that she felt the heat of his presence. "You're captivating. Not just in appearance, though that's undeniable, but in your presence, in the way you respond, in the fire you carry beneath the surface." Lila's fingers trembled slightly as she brushed a strand of hair behind her ear. She felt the weight of his gaze, the magnetic pull, the unspoken tension threading between them. He's testing me. I can feel it, but why does it feel thrilling? Cale's voice dropped to a lower, more intimate tone. Do you feel it? He asked, eyes dark and intense. The pull, the tension between us? The connection that's impossible to ignore? Her breath hitched. I think I do, she admitted softly, the words trembling on her lips. She felt heat pooling in her chest, a mixture of desire, anticipation, and a vulnerability she hadn't let herself acknowledge in years. Cale leaned slightly forward, the movement deliberate and controlled, closing the gap without breaking boundaries. Good, he murmured. Because this feeling, it's not something you fight. It's something you explore, something you embrace. It's dangerous, but it's real. Lila's pulse raced. She wanted to lean in, to close the distance, yet a part of her hesitated, aware of the intensity, of the stakes, of the unpredictable pull he exerted over her. Dangerous, real. The words echoed in her mind, stirring something deep within her, a longing she could no longer deny. Cale's hand moved subtly, resting lightly on the edge of the table, just inches from hers. The motion was deliberate, yet gentle, a tease, a promise, a challenge all at once. Lila felt her stomach twist with anticipation. Her fingers itched to reach out, to touch, yet she restrained herself, caught between desire and caution. You feel it too, he observed, eyes never leaving hers. The tension. The pull. The desire that's threading through this moment like fire. Yes, she admitted, voice barely above a whisper, a shiver running through her. I can't ignore it. Cale's gaze darkened slightly, approval mingling with a flicker of something more primal. Good, he murmured. Because desire, unspoken, unexplored, is wasted energy. It's meant to be felt, to be acknowledged, to be acted upon, carefully, deliberately, but without hesitation when the moment is right. Her breath hitched at the words, heat pooling in her chest, her body reacting to the intensity of his presence in ways she had never experienced. She felt exposed, vulnerable, and yet, thrillingly alive. Her thoughts scattered, a mixture of anticipation, fear, and undeniable attraction threading through every nerve. Cale leaned closer again, subtle, controlled, just enough that she could feel the warmth of him radiating across the small distance. You've never experienced someone like me, have you? He asked, voice low, intimate, teasing. No, she admitted softly, cheeks flushing. Not like this. Good, he murmured, a faint smirk playing at his lips. Because I'm not ordinary, Lila. And you're not ordinary either. That's why this connection, is so intense, so magnetic, so impossible to ignore. Her pulse raced. Every word, every glance, every subtle movement drew her in deeper. She felt caught in a tide she could neither resist nor fully understand. The restaurant, the world outside, the abandoned date, it all seemed distant, irrelevant. There was only him. Only the pull. Only the tension threading between them like an electric current. Cale's fingers shifted subtly on the table, inching ever so slightly closer to hers. The deliberate motion was both teasing and magnetic, a silent invitation, a quiet challenge. Lila felt a shiver run down her spine. She wanted to close the gap, to reach out, to feel the warmth of his hand against hers, yet a part of her hesitated, aware of the intensity, the stakes, the potential consequences. You want this, he said softly, almost a whisper, eyes dark and intense. I can see it. The anticipation. The tension. The curiosity. You want it, don't you? Yes, she admitted, breath trembling, heart hammering in her chest. I do. Kale's lips curved faintly in approval, the smirk subtle, predatory, magnetic. Good, he murmured. Because desire is a powerful thing. It can consume, overwhelm, and yet, it can reveal truths. It can teach, guide, and connect. Lila felt the pull, the undeniable magnetic attraction threading through her chest, her limbs, her very mind. She realized with a thrill, a fluttering anticipation, and a trace of fear that this was no ordinary attraction. This was something primal, raw, and undeniable. Kale's hand moved closer still, hovering just above hers, the heat radiating from him almost tangible. Trust me, he said softly, voice low, deliberate, commanding yet gentle. Trust yourself. Trust this moment. Trust what we're feeling. Her fingers trembled, hovering just inches from his, heart racing with a mix of desire, fear, and exhilaration. She felt a shiver run through her, a current of electricity threading from him to her, a pull that was impossible to resist. And then, almost instinctively, her hand reached out, brushing lightly against his. The contact was fleeting, gentle, yet it sent a shock of awareness coursing through her body. She felt the warmth of him, the subtle strength, the undeniable power that radiated from every fiber of his being. Kale's eyes darkened, approval and desire mingling in the depths. Good, he murmured, voice low, intimate. That's the first step. Feeling. Experiencing. Embracing. Lila's chest tightened, heat pooling in her stomach, her pulse hammering in her ears. The moment was electric, charged with anticipation, desire, and the unspoken promise of what could come next. She realized, with thrilling certainty, that her life, and her heart, had shifted irrevocably in this single, fleeting contact. Kale's gaze held hers, unwavering, magnetic, intense. This is only the beginning, he said softly. The pull, the desire, the connection, it will grow. Stronger, deeper. And you'll feel it in ways you've never imagined. Lila swallowed hard, heart racing, a shiver of anticipation and exhilaration coursing through her. She knew, with an undeniable certainty, that she wanted this, wanted him, wanted the pull, wanted the connection, wanted the challenge, wanted the desire. And she knew, just as surely, that there was no turning back. As the candle flickered between them, casting shadows that danced across the table and across their faces, Lila realized with a thrill and a hint of fear that her night had transformed into something intoxicating, thrilling, and utterly irreversible. The pull of desire was real, undeniable, and impossible to ignore. The restaurant had emptied slowly over the hours, the soft hum of music and distant conversations fading into near silence. The candlelight at their table flickered, casting long shadows across the tablecloth and illuminating the contours of their faces in a warm, intimate glow. Lila felt her pulse still racing from the intensity of the evening, every glance, every word, every subtle brush of tension between her and Kale had left her breathless, her mind alive with anticipation and curiosity. Kale's gaze remained locked on hers, dark and magnetic, as though he could read the unspoken thoughts fluttering through her mind. There was a subtle shift in his posture, a deliberate ease that still radiated power. Lila could feel the pull, the magnetic tension that had threaded through the evening, intensifying with every passing moment. You've changed tonight, Kale said softly, voice low and deliberate. From the moment I noticed you, abandoned and hesitant, to now, you're different. Stronger. Present. Aware. Alive. Her breath hitched at the observation. I guess I am, she admitted, voice barely above a whisper. I didn't expect any of this. Not you. Not this connection. Kale's lips curved in a faint smirk, approval and intrigue mingling in the depths of his gaze. Life has a way of surprising us, he murmured. Some surprises are worth embracing. Especially when they challenge us, push us, make us feel something we never thought we could. Lila's hands trembled slightly as she reached across the table, her fingertips brushing the back of his hand. The contact was brief but electric, sending a current of anticipation and warmth coursing through her. She felt simultaneously vulnerable and exhilarated, aware that each small gesture carried weight, meaning, and a spark of desire neither of them could deny. Cale's eyes darkened, a flicker of intensity threading through his gaze. "You feel it too," he whispered. "The pull. The tension. The desire that's been building all night. You can't hide it from me, and I don't want you to." "Yes," Lila admitted, her voice trembling slightly, heat rising to her cheeks. I feel it. I can't ignore it." Cale leaned forward, closing the gap between them just enough to make her aware of the warmth radiating from him. Every subtle movement, every measured inch, was deliberate, calculated to draw her in, to make her feel the intensity without overwhelming her entirely. "Good," he murmured. "Because desire, when acknowledged, when shared, becomes something powerful. Something that connects us, in ways words cannot." Her pulse quickened, and she felt herself drawn to him, a magnetic pull threading from his presence to her. She wanted to close the distance, to feel the heat, to embrace the unspoken tension that had built over the course of the evening. Yet, a part of her hesitated, caught between anticipation, caution, and the thrill of the unknown. Cale noticed the subtle hesitation, the micro-expression of uncertainty, and allowed a faint, reassuring smile to curve his lips. "Trust me," he said softly, voice low, deliberate. "Trust this moment. Trust what we're feeling. There's no need to rush, but don't deny it either." Her fingers trembled as she reached out again, this time letting her hand rest lightly on his. The warmth of his skin, the subtle strength beneath, the undeniable pull of his presence, it all sent shivers cascading through her body. She felt simultaneously alive, vulnerable, exhilarated, and terrified, aware that the smallest touch carried the weight of desire, trust, and unspoken connection. Cale's lips curved faintly in approval, his gaze locking with hers in a way that left her breathless. "Good," he murmured. "That's the first step. Feeling. Experiencing. Embracing. And now, we move forward." The evening stretched, each moment charged with subtle gestures, unspoken words, and a rhythm that drew them closer emotionally and physically. Every laugh, every smile, every fleeting touch built the tension higher, a delicate dance that neither could resist. Lila felt herself opening in ways she hadn't before, letting him see not just the surface, but the depths of her curiosity, her strength, and her vulnerability. Cale, ever the observer, noted every subtle signal, the quickened pulse, the flicker of her eyes, the breath she drew a fraction faster when he moved closer. He responded not with force, but with a measured presence, a quiet authority that protected, guided, and intensified the connection between them. "You've come far tonight," he said softly, leaning slightly closer, the warmth of his presence brushing her awareness. "From the moment I noticed you abandoned, nervous, unsure, to now. Strong. Confident. Engaged. Alive. You've risen to the challenge, and I've noticed every step." Her chest tightened at the words, heat pooling in her stomach, her mind spinning with exhilaration and anticipation. I wanted to rise to the challenge," she admitted softly. "I didn't want to let it control me. But you make it easier. Safer. Somehow, thrilling." Cale's smirk returned, subtle, approving, magnetic. "Good," he murmured. "Because life, and desire, are meant to be experienced fully. With trust, with intention, with awareness. And you have shown both courage and willingness. That's rare. That's compelling. The conversation, the tension, the pull, they built to a crescendo that was undeniable. Lila felt every nerve in her body alive, attuned to the subtle movements, the warmth, the presence of the man before her. She leaned slightly closer, drawn by a force she could not resist, captivated by the magnetic intensity threading between them. Cale noticed the movement, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. "Closer," he murmured softly. "Don't be afraid. Feel it. Trust it. Let it guide you." Her breath caught in her throat as she moved, slowly, deliberately, her eyes locked on his. The warmth of proximity, the subtle brush of intention, the undeniable pull, it all merged into a moment of exquisite tension and connection. She felt alive, aware, and profoundly drawn to him in ways she had never experienced before. Their hands met fully now, fingers interlacing naturally, the warmth and strength of him grounding her while simultaneously igniting a spark she couldn't ignore. Her pulse hammered, her breath quickened, and she felt a thrilling shiver race down her spine. Cale's gaze softened, just enough to reveal a rare warmth beneath the alpha presence. This moment," he whispered, voice low and intimate, "is ours. A night to remember. A connection that won't be forgotten." Lila felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming intensity, the exhilaration, the thrill of trust, desire, and connection fully realized. She nodded, voice trembling slightly. "Yes, a night to remember." The candle flickered, shadows dancing across their faces, echoing the subtle rhythm of hearts entwined, desires acknowledged, and trust earned. The pull, the tension, the connection, it had reached its peak, unresolved yet fulfilled in a way that left both of them breathless and transformed. Cale leaned slightly forward, lips hovering close, eyes locking with hers in an unspoken promise. "This isn't the end," he murmured. "It's only the beginning. A night to remember, but many more moments to come." Lila's chest tightened, warmth pooling in her stomach, anticipation and exhilaration mingling into a heady cocktail of emotion. I can't wait," she whispered. And in that moment, as the world outside faded entirely, Lila realized with thrilling certainty that she had found something rare, intense, and unforgettable. Cale had not just noticed her, he had awakened something within her, something alive, thrilling, and dangerously magnetic. The night had begun with abandonment and humiliation, yet it ended with connection, desire, and the unspoken promise of a future charged with intensity, trust, and magnetic attraction. It was, without question, a night to remember. Did Cale's unexpected protection and the sparks between them leave your heart racing too? Read hard if you love this story and want more thrilling alpha romance tales. Make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss a story that will sweep you off your feet.